AG stands firm, no jab, no pay for public servants. This is after they had some consultations yesterday. The Attorney General met with the union leaders and the intention was, to actually get to trash out some things and see where they could get some common ground and maybe both of them would be able to get the things they want, but apparently it fell through. The government will not withdraw its proposed vaccination policy for the public sector, says Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi. At a news conference yesterday, he further called on Ansel Roger, head of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, and the Joint Trade Union Movement to tell the country why he got vaccinated but does not support others taking the vaccine. Now, right up to Mr. Attorney General, that actually isn't a very hard thing to understand. Because from my understanding of this, it's not that they're saying they're against people getting the vaccine. He's combining multiple things there and saying what the men aren't saying. They're against mandating people to get the vaccine. If they have been vaccinated, they're obviously for the vaccine and they think there's some benefit to it. But they're saying that they don't think there's benefit to governments and employers having the power to force workers to be vaccinated, even if it's for a good thing. Al-Rawi said the government's policy is to save lives, as he reiterated that 9 out of 10 patients in the intensive care unit are unvaccinated. The Attorney General added that the Omicron variant of the coronavirus posed dangers, as he noted the health system is under pressure, bodies are piling up, etc., etc. The Attorney General met with the trade union movement and protective services virtually on Tuesday. He said in both meetings there was no support for the vaccination policy. Now, Chini Dogla, I see you saying there that the Minister of Labour should be addressing this, not the Attorney General. But if you listen to what the Attorney General is saying continuously, you'd understand very well why he's the one addressing it and not the Minister of Labour, because he does not want this, or at least they say they do not see this in the perspective as a collective bargaining problem. It isn't a labour dispute. It's a legal dispute. That's why their intention is to go to Parliament to get something passed to make this into something above the labour disputes. He's going to actually say that eventually here. The Attorney General said he provided this information to the government's team, and he can say today that the government is not in a position to withdraw its policy statement. So we're obviously at loggerheads now. The unions are saying they do not agree with this policy at all, while the government is saying that they are not going to withdraw the policy. So if an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, where do we go from there? Al-Rawi said Roger had indicated the unions were not anti-vaccine and that he had taken the vaccine. And this is Al-Rawi speaking here. You respectfully have me in a position where I simply do not understand how you can decide to take a vaccine but not be in support of others taking a vaccine. So perhaps Mr. Roger can explain that position for us, he said. And I can explain, let me not put words in Mr. Roger's mouth. I cannot speak for him. But me, myself, I have said it numerous times. I have no problem with the vaccines. But I do have a problem with mandating the vaccines and attempting to use coercive methods to get the population to do things. And what I think many people are keeping in mind is that something like this sets precedent. It says that, okay, such a step is okay for governments to do. A government can mandate that you put something inside of your body if they deem that it would be for your health benefit. And I'm not sure I'm willing to give politicians, human politicians, in all their great imperfections, that amount of power. It's about choice, very correct. Omicron explosion, the Attorney General appealed to the trade union movement to see what they want and what recommendations can they put forward to save lives that can be dealt with immediately and manage the Omicron explosion. Al-Rawi noted this country has recorded over 2,600 COVID-19 deaths, and the government is in the position where it is obliged to act to save lives. And that's understandable. This is what makes part of this situation so difficult where it stands, because people are dying. So if you're coming now and saying that what the government is doing is a bad choice, it's difficult to say that when the government could say, but look, people are dying. Over and over, I find myself in the position trying to explain this position to some others, this position that I hold, that I am not against vaccination, and I do not want more people to die, obviously. It seems so ridiculous to me sometimes when someone suggests that maybe this policy wouldn't be the best method to get what the solutions that we say we want done. This mightn't be the best method to do it. And you say that, and people assume that because you don't think this policy is the best method, that you want people to die. Obviously you do not. I don't think even some of the worst anti-vaxxers in Trinidad in the world are aiming for people to die. That's not what they intend. Arawi also said during the Delta surge there were calls for government policy, and now there's a policy during the Omicron. No recommendations are coming forward. Now, you see, here's part of the problem as I see it, where we will see the solutions to a lot of these issues. A lot of the issues that we're going to talk about tonight, a lot of the topics we're going to cover, I think what determines how it eventually ends is how the Omicron variant turns out. And we are seeing some evidence of this. The evidence isn't final, the evidence isn't sure, but there is some evidence of how the Omicron variant is setting up and lining up. We'll go through that somewhere at the end. We're still on the Attorney General. The Attorney General said he indicated there would be difficulty in giving priority access to law enforcement getting medical treatment, given that there are hundreds of thousands of workers who work on the front line, including doctors and nurses. So what happened there is when he spoke to the protective services, because if you remember, there's no branch of our protective service. And when we're saying protective service, we're talking police, fire, prisons, army, regiment, coast guard, air guard. There's no branch in any of our protective services where the vaccination rate is over 50%. The protective services seem very hesitant to this vaccination business. So when he spoke to the protective services told him they had quite a long list of things that they are basically demanding in order for them to agree to any policy like this. And here's the thing. Out of every area, I think, this is my view, this is my personal opinion, I think out of every area, out of all the bargaining forces, the bargaining unions that are taking part in this whole event, the protective services have the most cards in hand. What was the question you asked, Mr. Snow? So in other words, the workplaces cannot mandate it if it's not in law as yet. Well, I'll get on to an article here where we saw the industrial court, one of the cases already reached to the industrial court, and the industrial court gave the workers an injunction saying that as of yet, the employers cannot keep you out of the workplace. Now that was for that specific case. An employer technically could do what they want in the moment. What may be able to happen is you may be able to try to get something done in a court of law, but in the moment, the employer generally could do what they want. If they have the security at the door, they could tell you don't come in. But those cases are still in the court of law. The difficulty is, for example, right now Republic Bank, their workers, as I mentioned before, some of their workers who are unvaccinated are already facing consequences. But their union, Big Bankers and Insurance General Workers Union, something like that, that union has the bank in court, in the industrial court, but the case is set for February, while the bank has already determined by mid-January they would be letting go those workers. So I don't think there's anything that can be done to help those workers in between mid-January and February. So even if the court determines that the workers are in the right, the workers are going to have to face those consequences between January and February. And as I was saying before on some of the mandate policies, I think that's part of the trick or the coercion in the policy, because if you're a big enough company, you know that by the time, even if you lose in court, by the time your workers are put through that, the majority of the workers who are resisting the vaccine mandates very likely would have gone and gotten vaccinated. They wouldn't go through that amount of difficulty, because let's take that specific example. You're fired mid-January and they say they're not paying you for that January. And we already know that January has 150 days, the 150 days of January. So during that other half of January, that other 75 days in January, you are going to be home with no salary and no option, waiting on the court case in February and hoping, because it still isn't sure that the court is going to determine this in your favor. So if you're saying that I'm waiting and I'm hoping for the court to change this in my favor, and then February comes and you lose the case, you're in double problems there. But now if you've gone and you went and looked for another job and you're trying to make something on the side, and even if you win the case, would you even go back to the job place? And I think that kind of difficulty is where the mandates would work, whether they're against the law or not. Whether you win in court or not, a lot of the force of the mandates would work. As someone is asking in the chat about the unvaccinated workers walking off, that is the power where the unions come in. Unions, the principle of unions is very simple, Unions aren't about law, aren't about legality. They don't care about what flies in the law. They're about power in numbers. So even if an employer could decide, well, we get a law to make sure XYZ is the case. If you could get as many workers as you can on your side to say, well, we aren't going to work. And we aren't going to work is the primary right we have as free people. The only thing that changes that is slavery. You have the power to decide, listen, I am not going to work. And yes, the employer can say, well, we won't pay you. But if all the employees in a job say, well, we're not going to work, almost all the time, the employers generally come around to where the employees stand. I remember an interesting case a while back. I think it was in Trinidad right here, where some concrete truck workers were attempting to get things going on their side. And the employers were resisting them. They weren't listening to the negotiations. So what the drivers did, they filled their trucks up with the concrete and then walked off the job. You see, in a case like that, what you stand to lose is your salary as a daily paid or weekly paid worker. But if you unite against an employer, generally speaking, what employers stand to lose, the amount of investments they have in those businesses, is way more than what the employees stand to lose. So that's where the power for the employees come in. Okay, back to the Attorney General. I was saying that I think the people who have the most power in this negotiation, when we're talking about the unions, would be the protective services, because the protective services are the ones who would have to enforce things if things kind of go south. The protective services are the enforcement arm of the state. As I keep saying, Dr. Keith Rowley, Mr. Faris Al-Rawi, none of them jump into their vehicles and go along the roadways and ensure that people listen to whatever laws they pass. No. The way those laws that are passed are enforced are by these protective services. So if the protective services are not on the side of the state, and we already see that it is clear more than 50% of them are unvaccinated. So going here, the state could start with the viewpoint that you have less than 50% of the protective services on your side. And then there stands the very high possibility that some of the vaccinated people also in the protective services would also stand with their unvaccinated compatriots, would also stand with their fellow unvaccinated employees. So you may not have even 25% of the protective services. And if as a government, you do not have 1/4 even of the protective services on your side, listening to the policies that you want, it's going to be very difficult to get it through. So that's why I think the primary group that the government is going to negotiate with is the protective services. And don't be surprised. People are so strange. I've seen it before in those kinds of negotiations. All the different unions are standing together, but then the protective services get an offer that they cannot refuse, because one of the requests that the protective services is making is that they want the government to take some liability if there is some adverse effect. from the shot, and that's understandable. I understand that position perfectly. If you're saying that the shot is 100% safe, it's very effective, and we all have to take it, well, then take liability. If something happens to me because of this shot, then you need to pay me for it. And let's say that the government agrees to this, and they give them a bonus, and they tell them whatever else they want to hear. And the protective services then turns on all the other public servants and say, well, we got what we want. Tough. So that's also a possibility that they could negotiate with the protective services, get enough of what they want on their side, and then the policy becomes much easier to enforce.